Good morning, everyone, and thank you, and thanks to President Lewis. I'm sorry to have disrupted your order of things, but at least as I understand protocol, the President always comes before the Chief Judge. Thank you all, also President-elect Napolitano, and thank you all for bearing with me. I didn't actually mean to start today by talking about tombstones, but yesterday Secretary Johnson mentioned that I believe it was his great-grandfather's tombstone, in contrast to many of his other ancestors, had only 3 words on it: a good life. And, President Lewis just described me as a pretty nice guy, and that's 4 words, but I'll take those. Although I have no intention of going anywhere anytime soon. One of the great strengths of our government and our society is that free speech and debate and divergent opinions are not merely tolerated, but encouraged. That principle is incorporated not just into the First Amendment, but into the very structure of our government, with power separated among our 3 branches of government, between our bicameral legislative bodies, between the state and federal governments, between the state and local governments. And for nearly a quarter of a millennium, that system has protected us, and it has stood in stark contrast to systems that are totalitarian. And we should be immensely proud of that. Sometimes, though, and recently in particular, we have confused the means for the end. Our system of government does not exist to foster disagreement and discord. It relies on disagreement to foster progress through the process of deeper understanding of competing points of view and compromise that flows from that understanding. But when we blindly cling to the disagreement and forget the objective, compromise and progress become impossible. As I wrote in my recent article for Bar Week, our failure in civics education has led us to this place. Wherever you stand on bail reform or sentencing reform, no one wants more crime. Wherever you stand on gun control, no one wants more gun deaths. Wherever you stand on tort reform, no one wants more people to be injured. But when we get stuck on the means instead of focusing on the end, meaningful debate and discussion become impossible, and we become mired in intractable views, incapable of experimenting and unable to advance. We in New York cannot change that for the entire nation, at least not directly, though perhaps over time by example. We in the unified court system cannot change that for all of New York, at least not by ourselves, but we can make progress if we work in collaboration with others, which is what I'd like to address in 3 ways today. First, our revamped process for working with our coordinate branches of government. Second, civics education. And third, how the New York State Bar Association can help. So first, my team's approach to working with the legislative and executive branches. Well ahead of the legislative session, my team and I have met with countless state legislators and members of the governor's staff to discuss their and our needs and priorities. We've also revamped and augmented our system for monitoring proposed legislation, casting a wide net to catch any proposed legislation that might conceivably impact the courts and the people who appear before them, even if the legislation has little chance of passing. That enables the court's leadership team, which consists of me, Chief Administrative Judge Joe Zayas, First Deputy Chief Administrative Judge Norman St. George, and Deputy Chief Administrative Judges Edwina Richardson, Debbie Kaplan, and Jim Murphy, with the assistance of our counsel's office, to make an early assessment of the legislation. In doing so, we examine not just the intrinsic merit of the proposal, but also the operational feasibility and specific wording, so that we can work collaboratively with both the legislative and executive branches to ensure that the legislation that is passed will be one that is workable, feasible, or if there are objections to it, that people understand what those are. We believe that collaboration will produce a better understanding and a better result. But that collaboration is hardly limited to the leadership team. It is vital that our views are informed by the people actually doing the work. So to that end, we have convened housing court judges to discuss housing court needs, improvements in proposed legislation, family court judges, treatment court judges, court attorneys, and so on, with the same objective in mind: To best improve our ability to provide justice, we need to rely on detailed information from those doing the day-to-day work. Judge Zayas and I each have a staff member fully focused on policy issues. This work is time-consuming because our judges and court staff have not lost sight of our common objective. Even when there are sharp disagreements about the means, we were able to come up with compromises, localized experiments, or different solutions suited to different places and needs. This work, the work of helping develop, refine, and sharpen legislation, is important because it creates an additional dimension through which the courts can improve the ways in which we serve the people of New York. As I said at my investiture ceremony several months ago, checks and balances means independence, not adversariness. And when my team works collaboratively with the executive and the legislative branches, it improves the lives of all New Yorkers. As examples, I'd like to describe a few of the Unified Court System's top legislative priorities. First, the Judicial Security Act, which actually appears on the front of today's Law Journal. Introduced by Governor Hochul as a part of budget legislation earlier this week, the Judicial Security Act would enact measures to increase the safety of New York, state and federal judges by protecting their and their immediate family members' personally identifiable information from public view. The Act also increases the punishments for threats and crimes against active and former judges. Our judicial system cannot function if our judges fear that their or their family members' physical safety is at risk because of the decisions they make from the bench. We must enhance judicial security because, unfortunately, threats against members of the judiciary have been on the rise in recent years, and I attribute some of that to the decline in civics education. In calendar year 2023, the Judicial Threats Assessment Unit of the Unified Court System's Department of Public Safety investigated a combined total of 485 judicial threats, inappropriate communications, and other incidents, which was a 66% increase compared with a combined total of 292 investigations in the prior year. While the court system is also taking other steps to promote judicial security, for example, continuing to grow our ranks of court officers, we support this legislative effort to keep our judges safe. Over the past several months, Judge Zayas and I have discussed the pending bill with the executive and legislative branches, and we've further coordinated our efforts with our colleagues on the federal bench. Second example, improving the circumstances for families in distress has been a top priority for my team from the very beginning. As a result of ongoing discussions with the legislative and executive branches, a few weeks ago, the legislature passed and the governor signed a bill to create 13 new family court judges. This is a big step in the right direction, for which the Unified Court System is very grateful. And it will go a long way towards reducing the pandemic-related backlog of such cases. But increasing the number of judges is just one piece of the puzzle. Attorneys who appear in family court representing indigent families, parents, and children are vital to the proper functioning of our courts, and there are sharp shortages in such attorneys due to the failure to provide adequate funding to legal service providers statewide. My team and I are heartened that the governor has expressed her understanding of the need to, in her words, surge resources to family court. We have met repeatedly with the executive and legislative branches to emphasize that need, but also to explain that the state should adopt a more holistic solution that goes beyond simply augmenting the resources in family court. The broader question here is what the state can do to improve the lives of those distressed families. Enhancing various forms of support, for example, augmentation of services for distressed families before the situation rises to one in which the courts must become involved, could be highly effective in keeping children safe and well cared for. When we can assist a distressed family through the provision of support services, whether through courts or otherwise, outcomes for children are better. And not only are the outcomes for children better, when the state proactively provides resources to families in distress, it costs less all around. Proactively providing support to families in need can save children and parents the disruption and trauma of being separated from one another. It reduces court involvement, saving scarce judicial resources, and it also saves state dollars. Take, for example, the Center for Family Representation, a legal defense provider that offers free, holistic, interdisciplinary, legal, and social work representation to parents in child protection cases in family court. When CFR attorneys and interdisciplinary teams are able to get involved early, outcomes are vastly better. CFR can work closely with the family and the social services agency to identify appropriate services, allowing some children to stay out of foster care entirely, and dramatically reducing the length of stay in foster care for those who do enter foster care. According to CFR, a statewide average length of stay for a child in foster care was 29 months, but when CFR was involved, the period was less than 5 months. For CFR to provide services to one family, no matter how many children are involved, it costs about $7,100. But it costs a minimum of $77,000 a year to keep one child in the foster care system in New York City. CFR estimates that since 2007, it has reduced the New York City cost to foster care by more than $50 million. That's an amazing result, but note that CFR provides its services when courts are already involved with the family. Even greater resources could be saved if we could provide families with appropriate services even farther up the pipeline. As a third and final example, the lack of affordable housing drives people to court in various ways, most obviously in landlord-tenant and foreclosure matters, but it also creates ripple effects in criminal and tort cases as well. Obviously, the court system cannot build more housing, but we have been meeting with tenant groups, landlord groups, and local and state legislators to try and come up with measures that could improve things. Research shows that represented tenants have a much better chance of remaining in their homes than tenants without representation. And even being temporarily without a home can have catastrophic consequences for employment, children's education, and family stability. Of course, landlords need to be able to collect rent, otherwise the availability of housing will become even more scarce. Here, the long-term solution lies plainly with the other branches of government, and our focus must be on how to work with them and other constituents in the interim to minimize the adverse consequences of dislocation and the lack of affordable housing. Let me now move to my second major topic, civics education, about which I will be relatively brief, because much of what I would say is included in the Law Journal article I referenced earlier. For decades, judges, court attorneys, court clerks, and court officers and other court personnel around the state have been involved in civics education. Those efforts, though found in many places, have depended on the initiatives of individuals who came up with their own ideas, devoted their own time, and often funded the efforts out of their own pockets to bring young people into the courts or bring court personnel to schools to provide civics education in different forms. I could not be more grateful to all those people within the unified court system who have been so generous, but it is not enough. And it should be part of the court system's function to initiate and support civics education statewide. To that end, we are in the process, as President Lewis mentioned, of hiring a statewide civics coordinator who will facilitate information sharing among the courts so that a program or curriculum developed in one place will be readily available to others, who will generate program ideas and materials, and who will be able to provide funding for civics education. President Lewis and the Civics Convocation Task Force have announced that the State Bar Association will host a convocation at which I will speak in May, and the timing of that effort could not be more propitious, working together with you to instill in young people an understanding of how our systems of government are intended to work and why they are important is the best way to combat the rancor and intransigence we see throughout our country. That leads nicely to my final point. What can the unified court system and the New York State Bar Association do together? Since its founding in 1876, the New York State Bar Association has been a force of good for New York. Part of the association's power comes from the impressive breadth and depth of its membership, but most of the Bar Association's impact comes from its leaders and its members' tireless devotion to its mission, to shape the development of the law, educate and inform the public, and respond to the demands of our diverse and ever-changing legal profession. In support of that mission, the New York State Bar Association advocates for state and federal legislation that promotes equal access for all. What we can do together is obvious. Putting aside the work that I know we will do together in civics education, we need to rely on you and you on us in a couple of ways. As to legislative efforts, we will want your input, advice, and guidance as to the positions we may take and changes or revisions we might suggest. As I said earlier, making decisions from the top without understanding the needs and wants of those actually doing the work is a road to disaster. The New York State Bar Association membership are the people actually doing the work in our courts and are a self-selected group of those who care most about the law, its development, and its role as the basis for a stable, prosperous society. That means we need not merely your input on issues that we or our coordinate branches of government have identified as worth a look, but we need to hear from you about issues and policies that you believe can improve the operation of the courts and the provision of justice in our state. I've met several times with President Lewis since I assumed the role of Chief Judge. He and Pam McDevitt asked that the State Bar President and I restore the former practice of regular meetings to further our collaboration, and I immediately said I would be delighted to do so. There's one other important thing we can do together. I am here not just to ask for your help, but to offer ours. The judges, lawyers, and non-legal staff of the unified court system can help the New York State Bar Association grow its membership. We stand ready to help in any most kind of membership drive you can conceive, whether that is by hosting events at the courts for young lawyers, coming to events you hold, engaging with you in civics education programs, conducting joint programs at law schools, you name it. I do not offer that purely out of a sense of altruism or responsibility. If we need your help to move forward, the stronger you are, the more helpful you will be. I know I've talked for too long, and the way I know that's true is because I can summarize everything I've said in a single word, one that President Lewis himself used a couple minutes ago: collaboration. But so that we're sure that we don't confuse the means and the end, the means is collaboration. The end is justice. The New York State Bar Association and the Unified Court System share that same goal, and I look forward to our collaboration for many years to come. Thank you all.